Hi, Dr. Carlos Todd here, back with another video on how to fight less, love more. So what are we talking about today? We're discussing this issue of anger and conflict. That's what we talk about here. But we're talking specifically about the topic, why am I so angry all the time? I don't know why. I'm so angry all the time and I don't know why. So I'll tell you a little story. I think I may have saw my first client as a therapist in 2001, somewhere around 2001, 2002. And as the years progressed, I got more interested in this particular specialty, and I've been dealing with issues around anger and conflict for 20 years at least. And I do remember one situation where there was this one person that came in for anger management right after they had a heart attack. So part of the prescription by the cardiologist was, you need to go to anger management. Imagine that, right? The cardiologist prescribes all these medications, exercise regime, and they say, you need to go to anger management. And kind of, this is something that stayed with me because it really speaks to the effects of anger on the body. And for some people, anger can become such a chronic, challenging thing that they don't know why it's happening to them and can have a real effect on their life. And so the question of why is it that I'm angry all the time, or I'm angry all the time and I just don't know why, is a real question that is a source of frustration for many, many, many millions of people. Some people get angry occasionally, but there are people who are just irritable all the time. They are irritable, they're impatient, they're reactive, they're emotionally explosive. People stay away from them. They don't want to be around you. Even the dog, they kind of stay away because they don't want to be kicked, right? Or shouted at. Because even them, even the animals in your home, they sense that an explosion is possible anytime soon. And so for these individuals, when they have a moment of clarity, they're asking themselves, why am I like this? Why am I responding this way? Why is it that why is it I'm having these issues? Why? And that in itself can be a challenge. So I'll go over some of the reasons potentially why, and then we'll talk about potential solutions going forward. For some people, chronic anger is related to just being emotionally overloaded just as an adult. A lot of people are carrying stress, work stress, financial pressure in this time, parenting stress, relationship tension, caregiver responsibilities. When you get into your 40s and 50s, having to take care of older parents, right? Uncertainty about the future. When stress becomes chronic, it really begins to kind of bear down on you. And the tricky thing about stress is that if you can get this statement right, the more you feel, the less you feel. So this is just funny because the more the stress goes up, and the more the emotional exhaustion, the more the body and brain tries to compensate by numbing you to the intensity of the thing. So, the stress is this high and you feel it on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 9, but you feel it as a 4, right? You're not really picking up on those subtle signs that you're stressed. And so the idea that the more intense the feeling, the less you actually feel it is a real thing. But it's a trick because one, it helps you survive, get through the day, right? If you felt the intensity of it all the time, you wouldn't go to work, you wouldn't engage with anyone. And so the body tries to bring the intensity down in theory, but over time, the stress is working on you until you have an explosion. And so the emotional load is one reason why people have intense stress. We live ultimately in a burnout culture. You're working, trying to get ahead, and oftentimes getting ahead becomes, I think, particularly hard. The other thing is anger often covers other emotions. I've covered this in other videos, that people are feeling angry, but behind the anger is hurt, it is shame, it is disbelief, it is sadness, it's feelings of rejection, and it feels safer to call it anger, but in the background, it largely is something else, and something else to respond to. And we really need to kind of pay attention to the fact that your anger is really or can be something else. Some people have learned, and I've talked about this in other videos, that feelings are for girls. And so anger is an emotion that is safe to express. They learn not to cry, people learn not to show weakness and not to have strong emotional expression, but they're dying inside, and it feels like the safest way to respond is to display anger. But behind that anger is tears. And this is especially true with men. Statistically, men are prone to unaliving themselves far more often than women are because partially at least because of being so overloaded over time that comes a point where they feel as though unaliving is the only way that they can respond to the pressures. But there's ultimately another way. There's another way to operate, right? You don't have to operate in a shame-based environment. You can focus more on finding somebody to express yourself. I had the experience some time ago where I was in a room with just men at a conference, and there were probably 100 men in this room, and the speaker, after he had said what he had to say, he said he wanted to leave the floor open for men to kind of talk about what they were feeling, what was going on. And I thought to myself, even as a counselor, like, none of these guys are going to get up and say anything, right? It's a little cynical of me, but And one guy got up and talked about issues in his family, and that opened the floodgates. So man after man after man just started talking. And, the truth is that you don't have to live in a place of shame. You can express yourself. You can share what's going on. You can express your needs because the other guy is feeling the same thing too. But you think that he's okay. He thinks you're okay, but none of you are okay. And the anger is really kind of eating at you. Your partner or your people around you experience you as irritable, but there's really something else or something more going on that's really kind of driving things in the wrong direction. And this is the next point. Some people are constantly living in survival mode. They see danger, they see threats everywhere, and that in itself puts them in a hypervigilant state, this chronic state of being always on high alert. They're tense and they're emotionally reactive because the thing is that if you tell your brain to see danger, it will see danger. I tell this story to my clients all the time that when I was a young boy growing up in Barbados, and maybe 8, 9, we would play this game where we would walking home from school and we would play the game where we would look for double numbers like 22 on license plates or something, or look for cars of a particular color like blue. And so all of a sudden it looked like if we chose blue as a color or 22 or 11 as a number that we're looking for, all of a sudden we just saw all these blue cars, right? Before I wasn't thinking about blue cars, but all of a sudden all the cars are blue. So if you tell yourself that people are mean and nasty and they're out to get you, guess what? You will label every single action that they take as that. The people are mean and are nasty and their goal is to get you. And you will not be able to untangle yourself from that because that's what you tell your brain to see. So that's what it is. So trying to reverse that is possible, but it does take time. Unresolved resentment. People I do work in relationships, do relationship work, and people say things and do things over time, and resentment builds, right? Resentment is kind of that anger that one feels that an issue is unresolved and you don't really have a place to put it. You haven't been able to express it to the person, or you've expressed it and they don't feel hurt, you don't feel heard. And so resentment is a way of keeping you safe. It says, you don't hear me, and because you don't hear me, I feel this protective anger, and I'm going to put a wall around some part of myself, and I'm going to look at you a particular way because you're not safe. So this unresolved resentment can come from feeling unappreciated. It can come from feeling emotionally rejected. It can come from feeling unsupported, right? These are all things that happen in a relationship. They're all things that happen in the workplace, potentially with family members, feeling taken advantage of. Instead of processing these emotions directly, you hold on to it. When people have this kind of passive aggressive way of operating, they hold on to these things and it builds resentment over time. And then eventually the anger leaks out. And so sometimes you have a situation where people think something is resolved, and then, years later, and the person just blurts out stuff and the floodgates open. So really creating spaces where you can talk through things is important. But I think more than that, and I'll discuss just the issue of emotional regulation in other videos, but more than that, people need to learn to regulate. It's so important to understand that you're going to hear things in a relationship that don't really fit a particular narrative that you have in your head, and you don't have a way of holding that thing. I'm not asking you to agree with the thing, but being able to hold the thing in a way that allows you to hear the other person. I think you're going to struggle in many ways, right? Because I think it's important to kind of understand that your ability to regulate gives space for that person to be heard, gives space for you to be heard, and you actually may find that you have more things in common, and there are ways to kind of work through issues that you weren't really considering. So regulation becomes important. The fifth point here is the chronic anger can become part of your identity. Knowing yourself outside of being angry is just something that feels impossible. So people will say things things like, this is who I am. I've always had a temper. I've always been like this. People just irritate me. I don't know. I don't care. You normalize your anger. But normalizing something doesn't mean it's healthy. Putting something in a normal box doesn't mean that it's okay, right? Everybody in your house may eat unhealthy, and it's normal to eat unhealthy. But eating unhealthy in the context of your family system does not mean that it's okay to do. And people don't really realize that over time, these things are having a real impact on how you respond in many situations. So your identity becomes attached to anger. Your identity becomes attached to explosive behavior. You don't know how to operate outside of it. Point number 6 here is that your body also begins to pay a price for this chronic anger. Long-term higher levels of adrenaline and cortisol now begin to, I think the big thing for me is that it messes with your immune function, messes with people's sleep, and creates tension, headaches, fatigue. And we know that people, I gave you an example at the beginning of this video that the guy, he stressed himself out, which can produce inflammation, and inflammation has some connection to heart disease. And so there's a real health consequence. The release of stress hormones has a real consequence here. And then, you have the physical and emotional exhaustion and burnout that comes. Some people who are angry all the time, they just tired. They're always tired. The fatigue is a real thing for them, and just having a really difficult time knowing how to respond. What do we do? The goal is not to suppress the anger. The goal is to understand it. Where is this coming from? Why am I responding this way? I'm being open to the idea that this is not normal. The idea that it came from somewhere. It came from some deep disappointment, resentment, some early childhood experience, some habitual behavior you've learned to respond this particular way, some disappointments that have occurred in your life, learning where these issues have come from, and also being able to recognize that there are strategies or approaches to issues that kind of bring things down. So on a very practical level, what are some things we can do? 1, I think, is to identify triggers. 2, improve your emotional awareness, meaning that you recognize not only the trigger, but how is this impacting me? How is it impacting my perception of things? And, what can I do in this moment? Reducing chronic stress. This is a hard one, but for some people, being able to do small things to reduce stress. I'm a believer, watch your favorite shorts on social media or something, and just go for a walk. If you can engage in a hobby, something like that. I think these things are helpful. Then setting boundaries. Sometimes we overwork ourselves or overcommit ourselves, and I think that can create some issues for us also. And then I think being able to develop emotional regulation. I talked about this earlier. And in other videos, I will discuss the issue of emotional regulation a bit more. Obviously, as a therapist, I'm a proponent of therapy. I've really had some good success in teaching people these skills that we've discussed. And so that's an option also. Sometimes if you're able to process the emotions, you can kind of slow these interactions, slow yourself down, and believe it or not, respond in a very different way. Change is possible. A better response is possible. So therapy, journaling, just writing your thoughts down, sometimes getting the words out regarding how you're feeling, it really can be a starting place from which you grow. So that's the other thing here that I want you to kind of think about. At the end of the day, change is possible. You do not have to live in a state where you're angry all the time. As I've expressed in these videos, there are reasons why a person may have constant anger and ultimately can respond differently. So I think that's a consideration also. If you're looking for courses on anger management, there is a link below for Mastering Anger, or flagship website for anger management courses. And if you're looking for conflict related courses, I would encourage you to visit couplesfightschool.com. If you're looking for coaching on anger and anger management, you can visit us at masteringconflict.com, and there is a link on the homepage to sign up with me for coaching no matter where you are in this world. So thank you for taking some time to watch this particular video, and remember, fight less, love more.